Welcome to this video about evaluating Competency 3, Writes and Produces Texts. This is a video that's been created for ESL teachers in Quebec and future ESL teachers in Quebec to talk specifically about how to use and evaluate Competency 3 in an ESL classroom. All right, globally, our objectives for this video are to cover the evaluation criteria for Competency 3, so really know what the program asks us to evaluate. And there are 3 programs we're going to cover: elementary, secondary English second language, and secondary enriched English as a second language. We're going to talk about the writing process, the production process. We're going to look at a couple of examples of different kinds of activities. And we're going to briefly look at evaluation tools. All right, so let's dig into this. Let's start by looking at the evaluation criteria for Competency 3 for elementary students. And this page again is directly from the Programme de Formation d'Éducation de Québec, so the PFEQ, the Quebec Education Program for elementary. And it is Competency 3. It has key features, evaluation criteria, and description. The evaluation criteria are here. But I'm going to encourage you to read the descriptors below for what students can do. And it's important to do this so that we adjust our expectations for what students can do in primary and how they should be evaluated. So as we see here in Cycle 2, and just a reminder, that's grade 3 and 4, in Cycle 2, they write short texts that follow explicit models. So we can't go into a grade 3-4 classroom and ask students to write a paragraph in English or even a sentence in English. We have to, as teachers, do a model for them. We write a model on the board, we write a model with the class, we get the students to copy the model and fill in the blanks as needed, and then they can be able to work with that. The students need to be able to write a response or their own text that follows instructions and applies the language conventions targeted for the task. And again, keep that in mind. This is important as we think about how we can evaluate them. It's typical in a French program to take points off for each mistake that's made, but we don't do this in English. In fact, when we're looking at grammar, spelling, punctuation, capitalization, all of those, what we call language conventions, we cannot take points off for anything other than the language convention we were targeting. So if it's present tense verbs, if we're writing a sentence in the present tense, then we can only evaluate the present tense. You can't take points off because they forgot to capitalize something. We can do that if the focus was capitalization. All right. In grade 5 and 6, again, we're just building on that. They're writing a variety of well-structured tests. So we're doing different kinds of texts in grade 5 and 6, maybe, beyond simple sentences and simple paragraphs. So they're following the instructions. They're producing a text that's pertinent to the instructions, targeted to the task, and using the language conventions that you're really focusing on when you're teaching them how to write, an email or, a poster. Title or something. Okay, so here's the key, that they're doing short texts, that they really start with explicit models, so the teacher will show them exactly what to do, and at the beginning, students will even copy word for word, and maybe, you move towards filling in the blanks, so things like Mad Libs, if you're familiar with that. They can follow instructions. Again, language conventions that are targeted for the task, and they're starting to show more imagination and creativity as they get more and more comfortable writing in English. So they start to add in their own words and their own silly thoughts and stuff. And if we look at the framework for evaluation of learning, this is the other document that the ministry produced in order to help us evaluate. We're going to see those 2 criteria again. So application of targeted language conventions, so that's not just grammar, but spelling, grammar, punctuation. And again, only grammar targeted for tasks, only punctuation targeted for tasks, and only spelling that's been provided from model stuff that you've already taught them. You can't expect them to go write a sentence and then if they misspell a word, say, well, you should have looked it up in a dictionary. Really, we're focusing on the vocabulary that's already been taught. Okay, so the grammar, punctuation, spelling from models and what's targeted for the task. The kinds of texts that they're writing, so characteristics of the text, we're looking for texts that are on topic, that are respecting the text form and are well structured. So this is what we'll later on call content. So I'm going to call this content now. It's on topic. There's some good structure. If it's supposed to be a letter, it looks like a letter. And maybe it's creative. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be grading them on. Okay, let's have a look at the ESL program, so the English Second Language or regular program, core program for secondary. And once again, this is a page taken directly from the Programme de Formation d'Éducation de Québec. We're going to see again, there's the evaluation criteria here. I'm highlighting this. This is the difference. So you're going to see that there's writing process and production process. And that's one of the big changes from elementary to secondary. They're starting to engage the processes, so more complex kinds of writing. And again, let's read the side here that tells us exactly what the students in the ESL secondary program are supposed to be doing and how it looks. So the texts begin to reflect students' creativity. They write or produce texts that correspond to the requirements, okay? So that's the pertinence of the text. Is the text on topic? Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are they using the writing and production processes? So I'm going to talk about that again in a minute. The texts are a little bit more creative and they respond to the writing task. So if it's supposed to be to convince someone to do something, then, it sort of follows that. All right, this is interesting here. So the texts use simple sentences. They apply the language conventions required by the task, and they correspond to the level of language development, okay, the level of formation that's normal at this stage. Okay, errors are normal, but the errors don't impede understanding. So let's have a look here. So we have content and now we have formulation. So this is the grammar, spelling, and punctuation. When you're evaluating writing for students in the regular program, once again, we can't take points off for words that are misspelled unless they were words that are specific vocabulary words we've been working on and you've told them they have to use for this task. Okay, errors are okay. So any other errors are totally normal. It's part of learning to write in another language. It's normal, but what we're really focusing on is that the message should be clear. So you can help them see and identify some of their mistakes and help them make corrections. But you can't take points off unless they've really been something that we've been focusing on in order for to complete the task. And I'll show you what that looks like with an example after. All right, so let's turn to the Enriched program. And you're going to see that the Enriched program, even though it has similar looking evaluation criteria, is actually quite different. So we do have the writing and production processes, right? And again, there's a socio-constructivist basis here. So they're open to others' viewpoints we're doing collaborating. But the difference here is in the kind of expectations for the content of the message, for example. Okay, so the students in Enriched are now, because they are they're stronger and more able to use the language, they're more familiar, they're intermediate or advanced. They write a wide range of texts for different purposes and audiences. Okay, all of these texts can be easily understood by a native English speaker who doesn't understand the first language of the students. The content of the message is pertinent, the ideas are coherent, the message is well developed, they support their viewpoint with facts, examples, and explanations, and they elaborate on complex issues and abstract ideas. They demonstrate originality and cognitive maturity. So you can see that's a real difference in the content of the message, a wide range of texts understood, right? All of these things are much more advanced than what we would expect in the ESL program. The formulation of the message is also different. Now, here's where you can start to take those points off without, for mistakes that weren't really the focus of instruction. Okay, so when they submit their writing to you, They pay attention to the formulation of the message, so you expect them to do that. You expect them to read through and, check their own spelling and grammar mistakes. In Enriched, we can do that because they're using active and effective language repertoire and vocabulary and even idiomatic expressions. Okay, so there's few errors. They're also using idiomatic expressions, correct use of all the language conventions like subject, word order, agreement, spelling, capitalization, punctuation. And they select language to achieve the desired effect on their text, right? They use concrete but also figurative language. So things like metaphor, simile, descriptions. Okay, they use simple and complex sentence structure. So we are expecting them to use that. They use text components effectively, like they know how to use a title and a subtitle. We're going to teach them to do that and expect them to use that regularly. They rarely make errors of form and focus their attention on refining it. Okay, so they really are, this is where you can start to say, okay, errors are no longer acceptable. We're going to start to identify those, weed them out, and make you a much better writer. So here's the framework for evaluation of learning for the secondary level. Now remember, this is for enriched and for regular programs. So just a reminder, you notice here there's a little asterisk on the side, right? And that's because for these elements, the student should be provided with feedback, but they cannot be given a grade. So you can't give a grade for things like participation in the processes. You can't give a grade for strategies and resources, culture, okay? What we can grade is content of the message and formulation of the message. So content of the message, and we can also give grades for vocabulary and expression. Okay, so did they use some new vocabulary or new expressions, reincorporate that? You can see where there's some crossover here between C2 and C3. If we remember from the video on C2, if they've learned new words and vocabulary and expressions from things that they've watched, read, or listened to, then they can start to use that in their own writing. Okay, so I've got a little chart here that just shows the progression of what we expect in terms of content and form across the different programs. So in elementary, we want to teach them texts that are on topic and from explicit models. Remember, we work from explicit models. On topic, they have some structure. They respect the form. So a letter looks like a letter, or an email looks like an email. And they're creative. In the secondary program, we also want them to be on topic, but we're starting to do much longer forms of writing. So we're going to start engaging the writing and production processes. Again, we want to encourage them to be creative, and we also want them to make a letter look like a letter, but also fulfills the purpose of a letter. So if the purpose is to greet someone and share news, we do that. If the letter is to complain about something, the purpose is fulfilled. And again, for the enriched program, we have much wider range of texts, so all different kinds of texts. Text should be easily understood by a native speaker. Again, they're on topic. We're supporting ideas in text with facts and examples. We're talking about complex issues, abstract ideas, and they are original and cognitively mature. So that's the real difference in terms of content you can see here. Let's have a look at the difference in terms of grammar, spelling, punctuation. Okay, so in the elementary program, everything is from models. The teacher models examples. The students can basically copy the models and just adjust. And we only give grades for the grammar, spelling, or punctuation that you have been focusing on, teaching, practicing, and then you can evaluate that. Nothing else. In the secondary program for ESL, again, it's the same kind of things that they can, use the grammar, spelling, and punctuation targeted for the task. They're less relying on models. Just a reminder that errors for the rest of their texts are okay. So if they're producing 100 words, errors are normal. There'll be several errors all the way throughout. We don't take points off for that. The focus is that the message should be clear. And again, for secondary enriched, this is where we really want them to be accurate with their language. So there's very few errors. They can use all different kinds of complex sentence structures, concrete and figurative language. They can use text components, and they really are refining their writing. So they're identifying errors and improving it. Okay, so that's the difference between the different programs and evaluation. I'm going to take a moment now to talk about the writing and production processes. So just a reminder that the processes are a series of phases that we do in the Quebec education program. We have the response process, which is generally C2, and the writing and production process, which is C3. And again, there's a socio-constructivist approach here. Students cooperate and construct learning together. All right, so let's have a look at the writing process. You can see here, this is a page from the PFAQ again. I want to bring your attention to deconstruction of texts. And that's really important because in deconstruction, before we begin writing anything, it's really important that students have a model of the kind of text that they're going to be writing. So we can't just tell them to write a poster or write an argumentative essay or write a poem even without really looking at examples of the kind of text that they are going to write themselves. And asking, what makes this text what it is? What makes a letter different from a magazine article? How is it different in the kind of content that's in there, in the kind of vocabulary and syntax and verb tenses even that are different? And even, what's in a magazine article that's not in a letter? Why do we have images? Why do we have titles? These are called text features. So we really take some time to dig into those features and understand them, and then use that understanding to write and produce their own texts. Okay, so the writing process has 5 different phases you can see here. There's a prepare to write phase, and this is what is probably the most important phase, because if we don't do this one correctly and thoroughly, the rest of the writing falls apart. We really not just need to brainstorm, but also plan how those ideas will be structured. And I cover this more in depth in another video, but really good writing starts in the prepare to write phase. Okay, they write a draft, they revise, they edit, and they publish. Okay, so all of those phases are described here. I encourage you to pause the video and take a second to look through that, but also to look at the Programme de Formation d'Éducation de Québec, because each one of those phases is described pretty clearly. Okay. The other thing to notice from these notes is that these phases are not linear, so that we do move back and forth. As students brainstorm and think about things and write their draft, they may go back, or even they go back during the revision stage and say, things aren't clear in this idea, I'm going to reorganize my thoughts, or I've thought of something new. So you can move back and forward between steps. And any of us that have written, a longer essay know that this is, true for all writers, that we move back and forth. The other thing to notice, and they write this down here, is that not all forms of writing require all steps. You don't need to go through every single one of the steps, especially if you're writing shorter texts or less complicated ones. The example they give is an email. So maybe they don't need to go through, a full draft and revision, or maybe they just need to go through, an editing. Okay. And the other thing, the final thing to notice, is that cooperation and discussion is an important part of the writing process, especially when it comes to revising and editing. But evaluation is always individual. The student is the person responsible for, making those choices. I'm going to give you an example of a writing activity that uses the extended writing process here. And I hope this will help you understand it a little bit better. This is an extended writing process that asks students to create a new zodiac sign. So in the learning and evaluation situation that started up, they learned all about horoscopes. And so now they're going to write a new zodiac sign to reinvest their understanding. You're going to see here, they are reinvesting their understanding, so using their knowledge of text in a reinvestment task. So this is, again, how C2 and C3 kind of really work together. You can read if you want to, you can pause and read through this a little bit more clearly. It talks about the purpose of the writing task and gives the students some steps. But what I want you to notice here is step 1 is prepare. So they're reviewing the unit vocabulary in the texts, and they're writing as many ideas as they can. So this is where the C2 really comes into play in the preparation. They're writing down the stuff that they remember, some of the words and vocabularies that they're going to use. They're actually using a graphic organizer over here to help them rank different qualities in order and put those in shape. So they move from step 1, which is preparing, to writing. And this is an example of the kind of thing you're going to see more often in elementary school. But because this is secondary 1, there's a bit of, I guess, kind of transition here. So this is kind of a model with space in between, kind of a fill-in-the-blank exercise. So they ask students to start their text by underlining some of the choices in the parenthesis and filling in the blanks. Okay, so you move through and then finish by writing some more on their own. So it's a scaffolded writing process like this. So that's step 2, right? Step 3 is revise. So they're rewriting the text. So they look at what they've already written, write it out once again, but make adjustments as they write. And you're going to see too that they've, so write and revise. You're going to see too in these instructions that they've been asked to really use the simple present tense and adjectives in their description. So that's a reminder again that that's what they're going to be evaluated on, is the simple present tense and adjectives. They need to get that correct. And step 3 is edit. So the students are asked to read the text out loud to the partners. This is a great strategy for hearing your mistakes. Give your text to your partner. This is a peer editing step. And we gave the peer some checklist. You can't expect students, especially in their second language, to be able to edit each other's work effectively. I'll cover that in a different video, but it's important to give them a tool to help scaffold them through that process. So here it's a little bit of a checklist. Okay, and the final step, of course, is to publish, to create their final product. So if I were to evaluate this activity, okay, this long extended writing activity, this is again secondary 1, it's probably at the start of the year. So the kind of things I'm looking for in secondary 1, remember we are looking for content, so things that are on topic. Is their text on topic? Does it follow all the steps? Is it creative? Does it read like a horoscope? That's the purpose. For terms of formulation, remember errors are okay, as long as the message is clear. But what we were really focusing on was the correct use of adjectives and simple present tense in this text. Did they use this correctly? Because that was what we were targeting. Okay, vocabulary and expressions, perhaps I've asked them to use at least 5 adjectives because that was really the focus, and 2 new expressions about horoscopes. I don't know, I threw that in there. So that's the kind of thing that we could actually grade them on. And we'll talk a little bit later about whether we need to use a checklist or an evaluation rubric. Points, or simple straight up points can also work here too. Okay, we're going to talk now about the production process. And the production process is more complex than the writing process, but it does integrate the writing process into it. And you're going to see again, here it is deconstructing the text. And again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is, especially when you're doing the production process, to take the time to do this. The big difference between the production process and the writing process is that the production process looks at media texts. So any kind of text that involves sound, visuals, or audio, any kind of thing beyond simple words on a page. Okay, so media text, and they've given you a whole bunch of examples here: TV programs, computer games, music videos, websites, all of these things, And this is where, again, C2, Competency 2 comes into play, and where the program really encourages you to do some media literacy activities with students, understanding and being able to read some of the media that they use on a daily basis. In the production process, students express themselves by creating a variety of media texts, posters, audio recordings, short films, computer presentations. And again, this one is more like project-based learning. They're relying more on cooperative learning, discussion with the peers. They're constantly negotiating ideas with the group members because it's the group that makes decisions, unlike in the writing process where it's the student, the individual student that makes decisions. Like the writing process, however, producing a media text is recursive, so students can go back and forth between the three phases. You can see the three phases are right here: pre-production, production, and post-production. So again, just a reminder that the deconstruction, we're looking at examples of media students will produce. We're going to notice and understand features of the text. So if you want them to produce a poster, you're going to ask them to consider the color of the poster. Why this color? Why red and not gold? What kind of feelings does it produce? How is the font effect? You know, is it a big bubbly kind of font or a very slim, sort of sophisticated looking font? If there's sound in there, what kind of sound is it? Is it something that evokes an emotional response? What kind of images is it? Is it pictures of people, of places? What colors are used in those images? Is it a sort of dark feeling, or is it sort of a light and airy feeling? A lot of the media that is produced is intended to produce messages through emotion. But again, that's media literacy, so that's a whole other video we'll get into. Once you have deconstructed with the students, really encourage them to plan to use these features in their own texts. So just a reminder again, the production process has three phases: pre-production, which is where they sort of consider what their topic is, what their message is, what their audience is. Their production, where they actually put that together and produce whatever form of media that they're doing. And post-production, where they consider and revise and plan for next time. This is a cooperative process rather than an individual one, and it's recursive. Here's an example of a media project that uses the production process. So in this one, there are students, this is the very sort of basic level. A poster is one of the simplest forms of media that you can produce with your students. And again, we've got C2 and C3 happening here. So the students are using knowledge from their texts in a reinvestment task, and they are producing content. Okay, so again, we talked about the zodiac sign, and in another unit, they were talking about animals. So their goal here is to create a poster that describes an animal and gives your opinion about the best habitat for it. So again, a secondary one, pretty basic transition project from elementary school. Okay, we have our first step, which is pre-production. And what are they doing in pre-production? They're learning about a poster. So again, this is where they are deconstructing features of a poster: the title, the text, the images. Okay, we look at some of the real basics here. But this is important for deconstruction. Okay, so they can really understand those different features. I mean, this is one here. As a teacher in a classroom, I'd show them other examples of posters and get them to figure out what are some of the best ways to produce the most effective looking poster. In pre-production, they also plan their presentation. They decide what idea they're going to produce, who they're producing it to. Does a poster that is produced for 5-year-olds look the same as one for 65-year-olds? Probably not. What kind of things are different? Help them to recall some vocabulary, some key ideas, some expressions that they might want to use, especially if it's things like selling. Okay. Once they've done their pre-production and they're ready, that might include giving a sketch or, writing out a few key phrases. They're going into the production. And this is what's interesting about the production. You notice that the production looks really similar to the writing process, right? So writing process is part of the production. Students are expected to produce language in the production process. Okay, so here they're writing the text in a very similar kind of way. This is what kind of animal, what kind of animal is, and then they describe it, blah, 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 blah. And you notice this one is set up so that the two different partners have clear writing tasks. So each partner gets to produce their own writing. So if necessary, as a teacher, you can give 2 different grades, even though they've worked together on this project. Okay, and again, another step in the writing process is to revise and edit your written work. So that looks really similar. And then, of course, they're going to create. Okay, they're going to choose a title for the poster. an image, what information are you going to include, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's production. And post-production is they practice and give their presentation, and then they reflect on what to include next time. So in the production, in this activity, we're going to see the 3 phases of the production process. So pre-production, production, which of course includes the writing process, writing, revising, and editing, and post-production. So that's how the writing process and production processes look in class. If I were to evaluate this project, remember that that's what it looked like. Project 1, producing the poster. C3 evaluation, in the same way as the writing process. Is this on topic? Did it follow all the steps? Is it creative, the poster? Did you include the format and features of a poster that we talked about? Is there, at least one image? Did you use a big title? What kind of font did you use? Is the color, evocative of a feeling? Anything that we've really dug into in class. The formulation. So this is, again, the writing and grammar and spelling and punctuation. Did we use adjectives because that was targeted? Did we use a simple present tense because that was targeted? Is the message clear even though there's some mistakes? And did they use at least, you can set this with them, what's reasonable, the kind of vocabulary and expressions that they are reinvesting. So I'm going to conclude this video just by looking at some of the evaluation tools that we can use. Whenever you're doing something kind of more complicated with like the full-on writing process or production process, it's good to have some helpful evaluation tools. This is one that's like a checklist. So you can give this to a student when they're handing in a project or a writing process. If you like checklists, if you want to just give like A, B's, and C's, you can see that the formulation is there, the content of the message is there. And the progression of learning, so the targeted language repertoire, so vocabulary and expressions. I'm kind of a fan of the rubric. I think it's more clear. So we have the content of the message, formulation of the message. This is something that you can set up yourself. I do this by starting with whatever's on target, what I'm expecting them to be able to do at this level, and then, maybe what they want to do if they can go beyond a little bit. And I tend to pull into the enriched program a little bit. Okay, so and then we write, descriptors for what it looks like if they're a little bit underneath. Okay, finally, I'm going to leave you with some tips for evaluating C3. And this is based on my years and years and years as a high school teacher teaching to high school students, and also on research. So the research backs this one up, this first tip up. Whenever students are producing language, if it's written or oral, if you can get them to do short amounts more frequently, it's much more beneficial to their long-term learning and retention. So if you can ask students to write short texts more frequently, they'll improve more rapidly than if you just do one long writing task, maybe once or twice a term. So a suggestion would be to get them to write a sentence every class. At the start of class, get them to write a sentence about how they're feeling, or at the end of class, get them to write an exit ticket. Explaining a couple new things that they learned, and you can pick that up. You can pick it up and you can evaluate it formatively. So notice what the students can and can't do. What kind of content are they able to express? What kind of mistakes are they making? And then you can sort of adjust your teaching in response. So if you notice, for example, that they're making tons of mistakes in the simple past tense, maybe do a lesson to focus on that. The other thing you can do is if you're writing short text more frequently, you can collect the students' work in portfolios. So you're not going to give grades to every single piece of writing that the students have done. You collect the work in portfolios, and then periodically in the term, you set aside a class or two, and you ask students to go through the portfolios, select what they think is some of their best work, and use that as the rough draft. So they're going to take time to review it, revise it, read it aloud, read it to a friend, polish it up, correct as many mistakes as they can find, make it look really, really good, and then submit that work for evaluation. And this approach is really beneficial because it will allow you to get students to write a lot without you having to pick up everything and evaluate it constantly. And it also, the students really appreciate it because then they get a chance to be graded on their best efforts rather than sort of an average of maybe some mediocre days and some not so great days. Another tip, of course, is to evaluate C2 and C3 together. So anytime you're sort of at the end of a unit or a learning and evaluation situation and you're doing something that kind of sums everything up, do the C2 and C3 evaluation together. Evaluate grammar when writing. And this is the communicative approach. It makes grammar much more meaningful for your students. So rather than just giving them a grammar test, study the present tense verbs, study the past tense verbs, give them a test. Get them to, practice the present tense, practice the past tense, do the drills, get them to practice, make it into a game, but then really give them a grade when they are writing. So when they are writing, can they actually use it? That'll make that sort of why are we learning the grammar much more meaningful for the students. They'll understand that, if I'm writing a story or telling about something that happened to me yesterday, it's got to be in the past tense. Okay, I can see why my teacher's bugging me about knowing past tense verbs. Another tip is, to make things more interesting and creative, get them to write a variety of different texts. Variety is the spice of life. You can offer different options to the students sometimes, at the end of a project, end of an LES or unit, you can offer them either write a poem or write a postcard. I don't know. The more choice you offer, the more engaged they are. Use rubrics. I find that really, really helpful. And also give the students the rubrics in advance. This stops the arguments when it comes to giving the grades back. You can say, hey, guess what? You knew what you were being graded on. And I even asked students to self-evaluate. So they would have to hand in their piece of writing, but also what they thought they should get based on the evaluation rubric. And that kind of opens it up for conversation. So this has been a fairly long video. Thank you for your patience. And that is all of my tips for how to evaluate Competency 3.